Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Welcome back. How's it going?
It's going great. How about you?
Good, man. Excited for part two. Excited for your new venture. Last time you were here, you were just kind of right on the cusp of the new adventure that you're starting. So congrats on that.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's been a great run so far. Learning a ton. It's a super team, and like just the variability of issues is a lot of fun.
Yeah. So maybe for people who missed the last episode, who don't want to pause this episode right now and go back and listen to it, talk about maybe like the last sort of chapter at A&F and what transitioned you kind of onto the next role.
Sure. I love my time at Abercrombie. Was part of this transformation of the company. Right. We started selling black. We started selling dark purple. We put zippers back in men's pants.
Wow, which was wild.
I went from an extra large to a medium, and I didn't lose a pound. They just updated their sizing to reflect reality, right? And so, we built out not just a code and hotline, but also third-party risk management, right? And that really was one of the big opportunities that came out of that deal work, right? That came out of that getting to know and help the business on its issues, was that credibility and connectivity to be able to kind of bring the rest of it forward as well, right? And so we built that third-party risk management program, leveraging that existing expertise within the company, and then automated it, right? We automated it so that we would continue to be able to keep that standard without, taking over people's day jobs, right? So we built it in, and that gave us a lot of kind of credibility with kind of ongoing updates that we did in that international space with, corporate communication and kind of engagement. So we did get to the point, because of the credibility that we built up over time, right, where we were doing things that were relevant and that were integrated and efficient. That gave us more runway to do, culture surveys, pulse engagements, right? To reach further out into the company. And so it was kind of a process of building, right? And building success upon success to get to a program that, back in the day was, one of the finalists for Compliance Program of the Year. Right. So that did not happen overnight. It was with intention. It was with earned credibility, and so when I got the opportunity with Victoria's Secret, right, this was going to be a different animal, because, L Brands had been around in its current form for 20 years. And over the last 10, they'd been kind of, spinning off brands. Right. And so at the end of the day, in 2020, the two folks that remained were Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret. Each were like $3 billion companies on their own. Right.
Right.
And the idea in 2020 was Bath and Body Works was going to be kind of the legacy company. And they wanted to spin off Victoria's Secret. And this was, obviously due to a lot of the reputational issues that had come up, the Me Too movement, the stuff that was tying Les Wexner to Epstein,
Oh, right.
Victoria's Secret. Victoria, I mean,
the
they're
Epstein.
both under L Brands, right? Yeah.
Right.
They're both, they were both brands under L Brands, and L, limited or less, right? But Victoria's Secret makes a better headline. It always makes a better headline. And so it drew a lot of the fire. And so, decision was made that, VS was a liability, and there was an effort before the spinoff. There was an effort to sell it, right? And this was 2019 into 2020, and somebody went to buy it, and there was a headline at the time, 2019 into 2020, where it was valued at like a tenth of what you would have thought it was, right? And that deal, before it closed, was canceled, by the buyer who was getting it at that 1/10 the price during COVID. The stores shut down. All the stores shut down. And this was like March, April, of 2020. They took, I was an outsider at the time, right? So, I'm just reading the headlines like everybody else. They took that opportunity to cancel the deal. And there was a lawsuit, and the two sides eventually just settled it, said, all right, we'll walk away. But by the end of the year, by the end of 2020, VS, along with every other retailer, bounced back big time. They had huge, uptick in DTC and online sales, and there was a lot of pent up demand. And
and there's a lot of money flowing around. Remember those rebates and the PPP money.
100%. And the company had continued to focus on like its priorities. They reopened the stores when they could, and it worked well enough that it gave the board of L Brands faith in, hey, this can be a business that's worth kind of investing in order to spin off, right? And when they did spin, the day they spun off, the day one valuation was like, 5 or 6 times what the last deal had been canceled for, right? I mean, so that buyer had just blown, right? In terms of the deal that they had available to them. But it was in this context of, all right, we're not selling anymore, we're going to spin, that they reached out and asked if I wanted to come in and build out the standalone VS compliance program, right? There was an L Brands program, but a lot of the leadership of the compliance program from L Brands was going with Bath and Body Works, and what you needed, frankly, for a VS program, very different than what you need for Bath and Body Works. And so this was an opportunity.
In what respect was it different?
Well, I mean, exactly what I was saying. Like they took a lot of the fire, the reputation.
I see. Okay, gotcha.
With Me Too and everything else. So you've got the same store footprint, but Bath and Body Works, it's all personal care and candles. They make all that in the U.S., right?
I see.
Victoria's Secret, along with every other clothing retailer, they're making their stuff abroad. They're making stuff in Latin America. Totally different risk profile in terms of, you're a customer, right? The headlines you're going to generate, as well as, where you're manufacturing.
Yeah. And so in the context of a spinoff, that sort of one size fits all compliance program at the L Brands level was not really appropriate for, to your point, this totally different business, really. Right.
And that, reflected the vision that there was a brand new board of directors that was coming in. It was an all female board of directors, I think, with 1 or 2 of the L Brands board coming over and then bringing on 6 more. Credit to them to understanding, look, we need to build something that's right size for us. As we launch this, so this was an opportunity to do something that was going to be fast paced and at scale, right? And, the big distinction for me between, where I started at Victoria's Secret versus where I started at Abercrombie was, I talked about with Abercrombie, the blank whiteboard behind me, right? Mm-hmm. A none to some concept. Here, I was inheriting a company, a program that existed, right? There was a code, it had always been L Brands branded, but there was training. There was required and sets of expectations, and it was already pretty global in reach, especially when it came to the sustainability side and trade compliance side of the house. And so we weren't starting from scratch, right? So that, that was big distinction number 1. Big distinction number 2 is, we were coming into this with a brand new board, brand new leadership that was acknowledging from day one, we got to change, right? We got to do things differently than how they've been done, right? If we want to be Victoria's Secret going forward.
Yeah.
Sexy for her, not sexy for him, right?
Right.
I mean, that was one of the catchphrases at the time. And so you had this acknowledgement of historic challenges, which didn't happen right away. I came in under the old regime at Abercrombie, having to kind of inform as to what this would be. But for the first couple of years, having to do that in a context where like there was a disconnect between some of the messaging and some of the reality. That wasn't the case. So coming into VS, you get to hit the ground running. You get to hit the ground running because you've got this board that is here and the folks that are coming on board, they're here for the change, right? They're here for what's next. And it was a joy to be able to build out a program and a team with that momentum, right?
Totally.
Riding high.
Yeah, you had this real tailwind from that sort of board endorsement that you were able to run forward with. Talk to me a little bit about like how different that was. And, on the Abercrombie side, it sounded like they didn't know what some of those sort of basic foundational elements that were necessary were. And then over on the Victoria's Secret side, you had this sort of board endorsement, this sort of, strategic push to build out the program that you were able to build out. Talk to me a little bit about that difference and talk to me about how you were able to take advantage. I mean, you're a very, tactful and tactical, person. Talk to me a little bit about how you kind of took a different tack with this opportunity in the context of that board endorsement. Like, how were you able to take advantage of those tailwinds, whereas, you were kind of fighting against the wind in some respects at A&F, at least in those early couple of chapters?
Yeah, and even in the early chapters at A&F, there were always clear standards, right, and clear expectations in terms of behavior and rule following. It's just that people hadn't really been trying to connect the dots between like their individual specialty and requirements and the power and the leverage of combining those things. Going into Victoria's Secret, again, you had a more sophisticated understanding of what a global program could look like. So able to hit the ground running, able to make recommendations about kind of a training plan, an engagement plan that wasn't just foundational, that was it was integrated. It was going to be a 3-year approach to what we need based on the risks that we have. And I think that starting from a place, again, where we're all new, we're all building this together, you've got that kind of shared vision of success
right
from the beginning. And, one of the opportunities, and this was, something I'd learned at Abercrombie, was, your most persuasive approach is to build upon existing strengths, right? And so, for example, at both Abercrombie and Victoria's Secret, you had these world-class trade compliance programs that already existed, right? And you had really sophisticated information security approaches that had been built out, especially in recent times because of some of the changing laws with respect to customer data, right? So you had these areas of expertise that existed. So you didn't have to go, searching for other retailers and say, look how great they are, we should bring that here. You could, use your internal models as examples of what is possible.
There's sort of manifestations of the principles that would transfer over to these other areas you have to develop or something.
Absolutely. Right. Which is, the 5 levers approach that I've taken with my University of Chicago compliance class has been all about those core concepts and translating them across, not just compliance functions, but across companies, across industries. And so when you've got a model already inside, and when you've got the ability to talk about what they do at a higher level, then it can translate over. And that conversation began sooner at Victoria's Secret because we were starting from a more similar spot.
Interesting. What was it about, you had seen it in the headlines. You said you were an outsider when that deal was going on and COVID was happening. When you were approached about the opportunity, what made it so attractive to you? Like, did you know about the board dynamic? Did you see sort of some overlap and some new skills to develop? Like what kind of pulled you into that orbit?
Yeah, it was a combination of things, right? So I'm based in Columbus, right? Both of these are Columbus-based companies. It is very much in the water here. Retail is in the water here. These are big fish in our little pond. And so I knew what was in the papers, but I'd also heard from folks in the community,
Okay.
right, that were taking on this opportunity, taking on this challenge to forge a new direction, and it was exciting. What the people that I'd talked to and respected that were starting this journey had really good things to say about what was new and what was next. And then this was also an opportunity to expand my management and the subject matter that I was responsible for, right? So there was the opportunity to directly oversee sustainability and a lot of the ESG activity.
Right, because that was very hot at that time.
It was, and I had always had adjacencies and some co-reporting associated with that work, which was similar but at a smaller scale at Abercrombie. But going into Victoria's Secret, they inherited, again, they've been part of a $6 billion company, but they took all of that sophistication on the trade compliance and on the sustainability side with them because all their vendors were international. So, the scale of what I was able to, support and manage and lead was out of the gate, double to triple what the opportunity had been at Abercrombie.
So how did you prioritize what levers that you're going to pull? Because obviously, there was that strategic move to say, okay, we're not going to sell it. We're going to spin it off. We're going to kind of rebuild it for the next 3 years. I'm interested in what role did you play in that 3-year plan, and how did you kind of prioritize wrapping your arms around, because, you said a couple of times hitting the ground running, which was a little bit of a different story than, not that you weren't, hitting the ground running, so to speak, over at A&F, but I kind of talked about it in our last episode is you kind of took a scenic route, which is maybe the wrong term, but, you got involved with that deal stuff and the JV stuff and all that. And that kind of gave you some time to kind of plan, map your plan of attack, so to speak. Here you had to hit the ground running. So what were you keying in on, and how did you start to prioritize what levers you were going to pull in the context of that 3-year turnaround plan?
Yeah. So, always take advantage of a crisis, right? And I was coming in at a time where the company, as part of the spinoff, I think the last action that they took as a joint company, Bath and Body Works and Victoria's Secret, was to, agree to a settlement of a derivative shareholder lawsuit, right? And that derivative shareholder lawsuit included, 100 things that needed to happen with respect to the compliance program and with reporting and transparency, right? And so this was signed on, I was there, I'd been there 2 weeks, right? And so the board, the L Brands board had negotiated and established that framework, right? But it went live, pretty much week 3 for me. Yeah. And me and my team were tasked with leading the VS response, right? Because it wasn't just going to be us. It was going to be us with the rest of legal, with leadership and HR, leadership and finance, and all that we're going to get this done, And so came in with that mandate, right? And what was helpful about that, combination of things is, again, if you have outsiders telling you what to do, that works to a certain degree, but you're able to amplify that with discretionary effort when your own leadership's also banging the same drum.
Right.
This was not something that, anybody in leadership was rolling their eyes at, or muttering under their breath about in terms of, oh, we got to do this next thing. This was something we believed in. In terms of building out a team and a program. And so, my team became responsible. We asked for and obtained, ownership of the plan for implementation of that, derivative shareholder lawsuit settlement, right? And so that was an entry point to HR leadership, finance, audit in terms of setting priorities and moving the program forward.
You talked about at Abercrombie that there was this asset, let's call it an asset, of the brand that was kind of easy to rally, relatively easier to rally people around, this sort of concept of A&F. And I would imagine that also existed at Victoria's Secret. This is a storied brand that's been around for a long time. Everybody, there's one in every town, you know what I mean? Oh, yeah. And it was also in sort of a state of crisis, kind of to your point. did you feel, kind of like a redoubled or like an even increased sort of loyalty to that brand that allowed to that kind of served to kind of provide additional tailwinds for getting these things done? Talk to us about how you were able to like leverage that dynamic over at Victoria's Secret.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the great things about working with a brand. You have this opportunity to fight for the name above the door, right? We're all there to protect and promote this thing.
Mm-hmm.
That is a natural entry point to rallying the troops. And there was, I remember distinctly showing up in the late summer of 21, at the headquarters for VS, which was shut essentially. They were just there to pick up my computer and go back home, and the people in IT that handed me my equipment, just commented that like, oh, you're with VS, like, wish I'd gone to BBW. There was some concern, I think,
totally,
people that weren't on the product side, maybe that, did we miss the boat, right? Are we on the wrong side of this? And it was a really interesting dynamic to come in and support, right? Because those that are product facing and customer facing, you already had them. You already had them on.
I see.
They believed in this. A lot of them have been there a long time.
They were closer to the flame or something, or like the power of the name above the door or whatever.
Absolutely right. But what we had to do was kind of rebuild that credibility with the administrative side and the corporate side, and that function. And, we talked about this a little bit last time. How are you winning people over, with their hearts or their minds, right? So I already had the hearts of the people that were closer to the flame. I didn't win the minds of those that were on the administrative side of it. And we did that through having process, setting clear expectations and then meeting those expectations with respect to what we were going to do as a program.
At what point, you get there 2 weeks later, this kind of plan comes out from the settlement. And then you kind of talked about, you had this 3-year plan, and at some point in the future, it was able to be, sold at, 5 or 6 times what the deal that fell apart was valued at. At what point did you start to feel like, okay, this is kind of an upswing? Okay, this is all starting to work? Or did it feel like that kind of out of the gate?
Yeah, I mean, we had great traction in early days with resources, right? And this was one of the things that made me feel really good about the decision to move over, was that their actions match their words in terms of, we're going to resource this, you're going to be able to.
Yeah, they were serious about it.
They were serious about it, right? And so, the first year was about building out a team. I inherited 3 all-stars and, got to a place where we had, I think, 9 or 10 on direct line corporate compliance only, in addition to the 15 we had on the sustainability side around the world, and that year of building it out and establishing those connections with leadership was so important for, the progress we were going to make in year 2 on into year 3. But having that day 1 commitment, and the checks clearing on day 100, when we went out there to make offers and to build out a structure, was a big boon for what we're going to do next.
You did a lot of cool work on the supply chain. So I want to talk, the next 2 things I kind of want to talk about are like the portability of skills. You talked about, the compliance toolkit, or maybe in the structure or in the context of your 5 levers. There's a lot of portability in those skills, and those are perhaps industry agnostic. Talk to me a little bit about that portability and like what that pattern recognition that you accumulated, or like the basis for that, that thesis that you have regarding the portability. How did that sort of show up first at VS? And, what did you see that kind of validated this hypothesis or this, view you have about the portability? And then I want to talk a little bit about the third-party program and, some of the, I think, cool things you did with your supply chain transparency. So how does that sound for next 2 little steps here?
Yeah, and I mean, on the portability, again, you learn on the inside who does what and then who's good at what things. So same as any other company, you have people with kind of compliance in their job title, but they're going to be good at different things. So we had parts of the program that were really good at policy and procedure, but did they follow up? Did they escalate things? Was there enforcement around it? Maybe not so much. We had other folks that were awesome at enforcement, but some of the rules were a little unclear, they hadn't been updated in a while. And same thing with training. Some functions could be, were fantastic at doing stuff live, but, it wasn't scalable in a lot of ways. And so you really had to find where the strengths were and kind of assemble those strong assets and use them as examples across the rest of the company. And for me, it comes down to that staff and structure concept. Like how are you set up? What kind of leadership support do you have? Your policies and procedures, are they not just, written, but are they understood? Are they accessible? Are they current? On the training and communication side, same idea. Are you actually speaking to the audience? Are you answering their questions? Does the monitoring, do the things you track, do they actually matter? Will they actually change what you do if one of the data points shifts?
Right.
On the investigation and enforcement, is there consistency across it? Those expectations, those standards will lead any program to the promised land. And the thing that I realized when I started teaching and in looking for a way to do this, it wasn't just a retail compliance approach. I realized that those levers, they're the same anywhere. And it's not even a compliance.
Yeah, right.
If you've got any kind of organizational design, it's going to come down to your staff and your policies and how you talk about them, how you track them, and how you enforce them. Whatever the heck it is. Whatever the heck it is. Could be your new HR initiative, could be your new, supply chain transparency push. Like you've got the 5 levers to work with. And if you can, again, pull up high enough to see things as comparable, then you can make real progress.
Yeah. As you were kind of describing that process or the application of these, 5 levers in the context of the sort of transferability of skills, I was kind of thinking about, some people like this who are just good at games. Like it could be their first time playing Travelers of Catan or whatever that is, and they're gonna figure out what the game is, or they're just like good at games. Or you see the same thing in business consultants. You know what I mean? Where it might be a different industry that they've never looked at before, but they can kind of figure out what the angle is pretty quickly. And really, what that sort of boils down to is just a framework for the application of like previous pattern recognition. And I think when you can start to build that through experience or through kind of adopting frameworks that are just sort of out there, you really can get up to speed a lot quicker, and you can find the vulnerabilities in the game. I mean, the game is the game, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, not to jump ahead too much, but now you kind of get to do that in your new role, like in real time at pace. You can kind of apply this, to the variety of different sort of situations or problems. You get to apply this pattern recognition in a lot faster of a way. And I just always think that, there's so many frameworks out there, right? Like there's 1,000 different business frameworks or 1,000 different sales frameworks. And the value I think is perhaps not in the framework itself, but in the ability to have something that you can start to weigh the different data points that you're approached with against, to kind of figure out what is the path through this game that I'm, maybe have never played before.
I'm smiling because, I actually run a compliance simulation with my University of Chicago Law School class. Like that is the work of the work is, risk assessment and resource allocation and defense of that resource allocation for simulated companies, right? And that is absolutely the pattern recognition that you described there, and applying a framework, and I go out of my way to say, like, I'm not inventing this. Like I'm providing you with a simplified version in order to, teach a point that you can do this in retail, you can do it in tech, you can do it in manufacturing. To teach all of this and to make that kind of next group of lawyers and in-house professionals comfortable with the language and the skills associated with supporting these efforts.
Right. I do want to talk about that simulation because we really nerded out on that in the pre-call. But let's talk a little bit about this, the supply chain transparency. Like, what role did ESG play in sort of the initiative to fix the supply chain or fix that third-party management process? And I want to talk specifically about kind of how you were able to align your code with the supplier's code, and like what measurable risk reduction did that end up kind of delivering to the business? Like, why was that an important initiative? How did you go about doing that? Because I'm sure there was dozens of suppliers out there and so forth.
Yeah, and what's funny is that, again, coming into VS, they had this world-class trade compliance program. And so honestly, it was more about leveraging that kind of expertise and buy-in to ensure that our own materials, our associate-facing code of conduct was, up to speed.
I see.
And it was an idea of ensuring that you didn't have to mirror associate code with vendor code, but they should at least rhyme. And so when it came to concepts like human rights, and supply chain transparency, which is really just accountability at the end of the day, those concepts were clear in very kind of technical and didactic terms in the supplier materials, right? And they were either not present or too soft a focus to mean anything in the associate facing materials. So it's almost like coming to the middle with respect to both sides, because we held our vendors to really high standards. And, Victoria's Secret's legacy of innovation, right? What had made them a market leader forever in their product space was they had fantastic relationships with suppliers that they co-innovated with. Right. And so they had people that they'd been working with for 30 years. Right? Yeah. Staggering the depth of a lot of these relationships that exist.
True partnerships,
Yeah. And there's true value that comes out of that. And so honestly, a lot of it was, again, taking what has worked well here, translating it for that internal audience as well.
What was surprising about that, of stepping into that and trying to make these, you said they don't need to have the same words, but they should at least sort of rhyme. Were there any surprising challenges in that?
One of the surprising things about it was, the L brand structure. And again, Victoria's Secret inherited all of the international vendors, all the international offices of L brands, which had been a 2 to 3 times size the company of Abercrombie, right? So one of the surprising things when you got in there, being built out so heavily in that international space, was this wasn't just a spinoff, right? This was kind of a coming together of 6 different companies, because the way that they had structured international was very complex. And you had a lot of, you had a sourcing organization that had kind of been like a, standalone subsidiary. You had like an international stores organization, the international kind of like service centers. They had all, they were all registered in different companies under this umbrella in the L Brands days. And now all of a sudden under Victoria's Secret, they were being combined. And so it was not as simple as, getting your hands around kind of the international, organization. It was about helping them kind of join up as well, right? So they, you needed to bring them along the journey, right? But it was a different set of expectations and a different learning curve than you had on the customer facing side.
Yeah, there's a certain sort of identity. There's probably 6 different identities.
Yeah.
There's 6 different, I mean, it's easy to probably from a distance look at it as like, oh, okay, cool. This is like one company with a couple of different divisions, but the gaps between the identities of these different sort of functions can sometimes be very big. And, you have to do some real kind of intentional work to your point, bring them along in the journey.
Yeah. I mean, the distinctions were very real and they'd been well worn, because again, especially in that international context, again, people had been with the company 20, 30 years, they knew what their lane was and they knew, what the other company's lane wasn't. And that took a lot of, convincing to bring everybody together.
What role did the reputational issues that VS had that you kind of stepped into during this sort of turnaround? What role did that play in like what you were navigating? Like how difficult was that? Like, I just want to, I don't really have like a really coherent question about it, but how did you play a role in sort of changing that reputational thing, both internally, maybe it's across, frontline and, administrative, or even in the marketplace? Because I don't think when somebody sees Victoria's Secret today, they have the same thoughts that they had, in 2021 or something. You know what I'm saying? Or 2020.
I agree with you. I think we're very fortunate that it's worked. A starting point there is, because this was true at both companies, a lot of the reputational issues, very US focused. So at Abercrombie, if you went to Europe or APAC, our stores, they had not heard of, issues with Bruce Weber or, Time's Up. And all they wanted was the shirtless guys. They still really wanted the shirtless guys. Even 5 years after, we had moved away from that, you would go to our town halls in Asia and Europe and like, we missed the black and white. We missed the old school stuff. I mean, it was just a totally different kind of like risk calculus, reputational set than it was in the US. And we had to get out of our own head to a little bit there. Exactly the same on the Victoria's Secret side, right? Like
interesting.
It did not hit the same way outside of the US. Now, obviously, it's our biggest marketplace for both companies. You got to be conscious of that, but you also need to make sure you don't overcorrect with respect to things.
Yeah,
or
right.
You were able to segment your messaging, right?
Yeah, that's a totally different Rubik's Cube to solve.
Yeah, that's right. And so I always thought it was funny that it seemed like the international markets were like 5 years behind the headlines and scandals that we'd had in the U.S. in both places. But coming into VS, you've got, these Me Too issues, you've got, scandals from some of the former executives and leadership, and you've got a desire to, define yourself as being distinct from the old approach, but still, prideful in the company and the organization. I think that's really where the kind of the supply chain and that vendor base and the story we could tell with respect to those longstanding kind of commitments was a real benefit for us, right? Because we could talk about we could talk about the change we were making in terms of putting women behind the camera, right? And diversity in front of the camera. We could talk about that as like what we were updating at the same time that we talked about the product and the level of like local connectivity we had with the development and the investment in those communities across the globe, right? And so there was this ability to kind of pair, what is new and different and up to date with what has worked and what we remain prideful about. But there was real sensitivity from day one with respect to reputation issues. Because we were a new company. We were a what did I used to say? I used to say that we had a 40-year-old's brain inside a 1-year-old's body. So we had all these
kind of a Benjamin Button situation.
We had all these worries and self-doubt and all these ideas about what we wanted to do and where we wanted to go, but I mean, we were new. We didn't have like the muscle memory to get out there
Right.
and tackle all of these things at once. But one of the things that we were most sensitive about, at that spinoff time was, keeping our noses clean with respect to anything relating to sexual harassment, discrimination, and with both in front of the camera and behind it.
During that ESG era, which I think it's safe to call it an era now, maybe it's not, but I kind of think of it as, I just remember a time where it was like every webinar was on ESG. Everybody was talking about ESG, and there were certain sort of, I'll call them prophets, lone voices crying out in the wilderness. Like Allison Taylor's an example of one who was talking about, if you're going to do any ESG stuff, there's going to be this sort of incentive, let's say, to like greenwash your way through it. And then, she was kind of talking about the importance of like, if you're going to do it for real. And in my research for this episode, just looking back at some of the stuff that you guys did, it didn't seem like a greenwash thing. It didn't seem like, a marketing exercise for stock price or something like that. It seemed like it was really rooted in a genuine desire to, like you said, do the things that we say that we're going to do. Yeah. Is that view from the outside accurate? And like, talk to me a little bit about like why that was so special,
Yeah. And, I love Allison Taylor. I'm on the back of the book. That'll always be my biggest claim to fame. Yeah. One of the ability to talk about sustainability and our efforts and our investments in that place in an authentic manner is because we've been doing the work. I don't get to take any credit for the fact that they had a very sophisticated program in place for years. They led the pack, and they really did care about, who was making the stuff, where, and what they were putting in it. That description of it is something that I kind of brought in and helped so that we could kind of align on all these technical standards that we're talking about this, but they'd always really care.
It kind of boils down to that, to your point.
That's what it comes down to, who's making it? Like, are they getting paid, right? Where are they? Not in North Korea? And what are they putting in it? Not Chinese cotton, right? Like, these are the things you got to understand and take care of. And so, we were able to talk about our program in that way because we had put in the work. One of the things that I'm most proud of, and this was not an effort that I led, it was one that I supported, but that ties directly to this, was our U.S. cotton initiative, right? We now source, some significant percentage of our, cotton products from diverse farmers that are U.S. based, right? This industry was like abandoned by U.S. retailers. We had to rewrite the rules in terms of how do you do direct purchases of cotton in the U.S. because it had been left behind. It had been left behind, and the cotton report that would have come out probably in 24 or 25 tells this story of, again, investment, right? And investment in communities, but that's tied to our products, that's tied to our values and our core mission. And it goes back to Allison's idea of like, if you're going to do it in a way that makes sense for your business. And this is, a mantra that I talk about, with my clients is you're never going to make everybody happy when you talk about, your commitments and your values-based investments, right? People are going to think you're either doing too little or too much, right? And the safest approach is to be able to talk about whatever you want to do in the terms of your business. How does it make sense for our vendors, for our customers, for our employees? And if you can tie it, the closer you can tie it to those things, right? The safer you are from taking on flack, one, and the more effective it's going to be, right?
Yeah,
the more you're going to get out of it.
It's actually defensible, right? It's not like a paper tiger program or something like that,
Well, and I mean, you're not just paying to get random certifications or random awards that are out there. There are a lot of great causes, but if they're not tied to the business that we are in, it is hard to justify the investment in that as opposed to the investment in our own people.
Why is that point so hard for the average compliance department to get right? Because to me, that is like a foundational axiom, foundational principle that drives a strong compliance program forward. I find a lot of folks are still talking in should, oh, we should do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've been in this industry for a decade now, and it's like we're still talking about, which is fine. I can always find something to talk about, but we're still talking about like connecting to the business, connecting to the objectives of the business. I mean, that's essentially what you said right there. If I can have the defensive, I can build a defensibility, I can build toward effectiveness if I can talk about in authentic terms why whatever initiative we're talking about matters for our business, for our vendors, for our stakeholders, for our shareholders, whatever. Why is that so tough? And maybe this folds into another question, which maybe you'll bring together. Sorry to ramble through this, but at the start of our conversation, you talked about at A&F when you guys were up for program of the year. You built enough leverage into your program to do some of these things like culture surveys and pulse surveys and so forth, which seems like an important non-urgent piece of the puzzle that is critical for a fully kind of three-dimensional, let's say, multi-dimensional effective compliance program. So why don't we have time for those things, investing in the fascia, let's say, that sort of connectivity to the shareholders and also the connectivity to the business objectives? Like, why is this still a struggle for our industry?
So I think there's a couple of points there. I think that a lot of it comes down to having a diverse skill set in these positions, right? Because we started this question 10 minutes ago. We started this question on the idea of sustainability and ESG and why would we greenwash as opposed to investing in our business, right? And I think that everybody's got good intent, right? But I think that you've had a lot of people that have a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of high-minded ideas that are then, they're self-selecting into roles that have that focus, right? That have an ESG focus or a DEI focus. And so they have not been on the business side, right? And they don't have that connectivity. And so they're, going with what they know, right?
Okay.
I think that's the exact same challenge exists with people that have been, auditors and then in the Treasury Department, right? Or, in a lot of the highly technical compliance functions, they have been very much, in the weeds on check the box and document and triplicate approach without having to have a persuasive, a collaborative mindset, banks, highly regulated companies. You got 100 people in your, reporting structure. You guys are in an echo chamber,
right?
You have your role to fill.
Yeah, that's your world.
That's it. You know. And so when you want to make this work in a company that is not one of those traditionally highly regulated, you've got to cast around for allies and you got to bring people on board, but if you're not hiring for the right things, then it's going to be hard. It's going to be unnatural.
That's probably the best answer I've gotten to this question. So nice job on that. You should teach. But I mean, kidding aside, I think you're exactly right. I think we all have a lens that we're looking at the world through, and that's accumulated through our experiences and our skills and all those kinds of things. And you're just going to apply whatever, like an engineer, everything's a machine. An artist, everything's a painting. A salesperson, everything is messaging, right? Like that's what you kind of, you kind of default to these sort of base frameworks or whatever. And I think, from a distance, sometimes I think people who are non-regulated industries, I always think like every strength has an equal and opposite weakness, and I think people that are in non-regulated industries sort of look on the other side, they look at the green grass on the other side of the fence and they say, man, if I was working in a regulated industry, it'd be so great because I'd have all this endorsement and, compliance would matter. And it's like, well, over there you have a sort of a counterbalancing force, which is that echo chamber effect or, So I think, to your point, that pattern recognition and being able to kind of knock those walls down and see how you can either build out more pattern recognition, better frameworks, or at least have a drive to try to connect to the business, irrespective of the kind of industry that you're in. I think it ends up unlocking a lot, and it ends up giving you some more hints on how you can better frame your program, how you can better frame your initiatives to actually build toward the effectiveness that we're all kind of running at,
Yeah, we don't do this because it's easy. We do it.
True, right.
It's hard.
Well, and also, thank God it's not easy.
We got our NASA's up in the air again. We're tying it all back to where we're going.
So I want to talk a little bit about, as we wrap up here, I want to talk a little bit about the simulation thing. And, you have this thing where it's 25 tools, pick 3 exercise. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to talk a little bit about kind of future casting, with respect to what's trending now, where you see the big gaps for, compliance leaders in the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah, I will be brief, on both of these. And I will say that with respect to the simulation, we've got kind of levers that are built out for a program, based upon, again, staff and structure, training, all these other areas, that gets you to the 5. And then I focus on, your people, your data, your third parties, your government engagements, and your culture, right? And, you can have training on HR topics. You can have training on InfoSec. You could have policy making around supply chain transparency, right? But the exercise and what makes it a realistic simulation is the scarcity concept, right? They've got to identify what are the biggest risks for them as a company and prioritize. What do we think? Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? And so that allows the students to take what the ECCP says. This is not prescriptive. Not everything applies to everybody. It's not a pure checklist, right? Puts that into reality for them, because you can't do everything. And what you need to be able to do is exercise judgment based upon an understanding of your risks and be able to justify it and tell the story, right? Tell the story of where you've made those investments. And that's what we do with the simulation. And that's round 2. And then in round 3, I break all their programs. I roll some dice and nothing goes well for anybody. And then they have to explain what happened. They have to explain what happened and what they're going to do about it in the final round. And it is a joy. We've already done, exercise 1, is complete. Everybody's super engaged. They get it. They're talking the talk. They are, collaborating together and justifying the trade-offs associated with things. And, when they take it seriously, at the front of the room, everybody, it just locks right into what we're doing.
Totally.
And so I've loved that, and excited to see kind of where the rest of the quarter goes. When I think about kind of the future, the students are helping me see the future right now. And this actually came up at, maybe it was Compliance Week last year. I'm trying to think, whatever the last main conference I went to, there was just a sidebar about the fact that people that had been teaching over the last couple of years had seen a sea change. 3 years ago, AI was prohibited in the classroom. Right? 2 years ago, AI, it was kind of up to the professor, right? It was up to their discretion, but it was acknowledged as existing. This year, right, if you're not embracing it and updating your curriculum to, encourage the use or illustrate how it is used and how it's changing, you're doing a disservice to your students. And, I've updated my curriculum and how I'm grading to reflect this new kind of technology. They can go get AI to look at 10Ks for analogous companies and come back with similarities, right? Great. They don't have to spend their time doing that, but they have to justify anything they're going to put on the screen.
Totally.
And talk about how that, how that matters to what their next investment's going to be. It is all the more important to have that human skill set, that
Mm-hmm.
persuasion. And so one of the fun things that I changed this year was there's a no reading rule, like during your group presentation, because people,
Good.
people, I used to be able to tell the difference between the quality of some of the presentations based upon how pretty the slides were, right? Man, they spent a lot of time on these, I'm going to grade this well, even if they're sitting up there reading the script during the presentation. That's out the door. And I told them in class 1, and I was transparent about it. I said, look, those slides, they look great, right? I put my information in, I told it to do that. It did it, right? You get to do that too, right? But what that means is we're raising the bar elsewhere,
Smart.
So,
you need to master the material. You need to be able to talk about the material, since you didn't have to spend so much time prettying up slides and moving pixels around.
Absolutely. And so
that's smart.
How that's shown up in the classroom is how it's going to show up, in the profession.
Totally.
And we still have the opportunity. I think we're doing a decent job at trying to keep our hat in the ring for AI governance and for being the human in the loop. And I think that's, where's the profession going next 18 months? My answer from the classroom is the answer for the boardroom. It's the same.
Awesome. Well, man, another home run. I appreciate you coming on. This was, we split it up into 2 episodes, but they were really full episodes, and just learned a lot as usual. So appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to seeing you in real life, hopefully soon at a couple of these conferences. We're entering conference season now, and all the best over at Diligent with Spark. I mean, it really is. It's like, I don't know. It's like Iron Man joined the Avengers or something.
I like it. It's been so fun so far. Christy has done a fabulous job with that integration. It's been a year of success. Those things aren't easy to do.
They're not. And she held it together. And I had no clue that that's what was on your radar last time we talked. And after I saw your announcement, I was like, oh, dude, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, well, the proof's in the pudding, and we're loving it so far.
I love it. All right, well, have a wonderful day. Thanks again for coming, man. See ya.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.